Hello everyone. So welcome, good evening, good night. Welcome to episode 36 of Teh Tarik with Walid. So today we are fortunate, I think, and we are blessed to have one of the legends in the history of Singapore politics, of civil society, and define politics more broadly instead of just electoral politics, right? Because people think of politics as just the arena of partisan politics, when actually it's much more than that. Hi everyone. So Professor Yaakob is here. Thank you so much. So I am delighted to say that we have a legendary figure, Constance Singam, and she recently released. Well, Ethos approached me to ask whether I wanted to have this session with her, Waylin from Ethos, and it's like the Malay saying, a person who's sleepy, you offer a pillow to that person. Of course, I want to have a session with Constance Singam. Who doesn't, right? So. This is an updated version of her memoir. I think the first one was released about 10 years ago. She can correct me if I'm wrong. So, and of course, there's been some controversy about her book launch. Her book launch did take place on the weekend, but there's some controversy because the initial location cancelled for reasons that are not really understood by me, at least. Maybe she can shed some light on it. But basically, Constance has been there, done that. She was involved in civil society when being an activist was a dirty word. Maybe it still is, but not so much, I think. I think even PAP, grassroots folks, they call themselves grassroots activists, right? But back when she was involved, it was really not an easy thing to do. So I am absolutely delighted to have her today. So let me just send a request to her, and hopefully it works. She was trying out in the afternoon. Yeah. So Waylin told me that Constance was feeling a bit nervous. I said, huh? Even Constance is nervous at something. Oh, hey, hello.
Yes.
Hello, hi. Oh, I can only.
Till
Yeah,
I
yeah.
till I feel I was nervous. This is the first time I'm having.
Nice to know you're still human. Okay, so you still have those feelings. Yeah. So congratulations on
Thank
this,
you.
and
Thank
I
you.
thank you so much for being here. So however the conversation goes today, and I think maybe there'll be some disagreements or whatever it is, but from the outset, I wanted to really register my thanks for everything that you've done for Singapore, for civil society, because I think right now, it's almost sexy to call yourself an activist, right? And you see people, right now, especially for people like myself, we wear that label, some of us at least quite proudly. But back then, it was really hard. It was really brave. Like now, it's not that brave anymore, right? Now with social media, you see other people doing it, so you're emboldened as well, right? But at that point in time, there was no such thing. So hats off to you, and thank you for everything that you've done. And you really paved the way for other people. I think people.
Thank you. No. It was my. I mean, I learned a lot by being an activist, and I think
Right.
along with Singaporeans, I too grew in understanding what politics is all about, in understanding public policies, in understanding history, learning how to look at different perspectives. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to have contributed, because I am a very proud Singapore citizen.
Right.
And
Thank
I
you so much.
feel that citizens have to be active.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much. And I was reading this book, so I just got it yesterday. So I tried to read as much as I could. And it's a very easy read. And when it's an easy read, I know a lot of difficult writing went into it, right? Thank you so much. And you discuss so many things like gender, race, civil society. You even took shots at the government, I suppose, for being draconian and so on. So it covered everything, right? So maybe the first question is really a softball, or it's a rhetorical question, I suppose. So what was so controversial about this that it had to be cancelled? Or by the way, I'm thankful no one cancelled this session. But why did the organizers had to cancel the book launch?
Well, it is a bit of a surprise because 10 years ago, it was launched at the Arts House without
Oh,
any problems. Yeah.
oh,
And yes, in the parliament itself,
yeah,
Um, and so when this came out, now I can only speculate that over the last 10 years, the management has changed. The people making the decisions have changed. They have gone through longer conditioning and worrying about what the bosses would want them to do. And so I think it's just a few individuals, but then of course they're all functioning in a culture as we are
yeah,
outside of it. But those who are inside working in government institutions have to worry about their jobs, about what the bosses want them to do, and it's always trying to guess what the bosses want to do.
right.
And as you said in your introduction, my book deals with everything. And civil society, feminism, activism, public policies, that's enough to freak anybody out.
or excite people.
Yes, that's
Depending
right.
on who you ask. So it's interesting, right? So 10 years ago, so the same institution allowed it. So what does that tell us about the space for contestations in this Constance?
Precisely.
Right.
That is what is worrying, have they become more rigid,
Mm.
and so who are the people who are making decisions in Arts House now? Because we cannot, I know NAC said they have no problems, but NAC have to take some of the responsibilities for creating a culture that people can work independently or intelligently, read the book and see why it was 10 years ago it went through and it's all over the libraries in the National Library, and why did it freak them out now? It's something that's a question that worries me, and it should worry civil society activists, and it should worry the state.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, I was when I first heard of it, then I was just oh my god, like, and the worry is also, right, if this can happen to Constance Singam, it can happen. It can happen to anyone, right? I mean, as far as activists go, I mean, you sort of already have a reputation, in your age, so you are pretty much untouchable already, right? Also, I thought, right?
Yes.
So when I saw it happen to you, right, then I was thinking, oh my god, it could happen to people who are more plebeians than yourself, right?
And old and aging and
Old but healthy and still sharp. So that's all that matters, right? Yeah. So thank you for that. I think it's very insightful. So when I was looking for when I was reading this, right, it's not just about personal stories, right? Because personal stories ultimately are really personal. But your personal stories, I always felt there was something I could extract from it, and you did it purposely as well, right? When you're telling these stories, there's always a broader national agenda that you want to relate it to, right? And I think this cancellation is also it's a personal story that is political, right? The personal is political, and
personal is political. Yeah.
this personal story is super political. Yeah. So let's discuss that, right? Because the book was really a story about activism as much as anything else, right? So do you think today that, because you've been in the activist scene for a very long time, you've seen maybe transformations or evolutions, and would you say that one of the criticisms that people always direct towards activists today is, the champagne liberals, right? You guys are Western educated, this liberal elite, and you guys are speaking languages that people do not understand, right? I don't mean English, right? I mean the vocabulary, the phrasing. Yeah. And when in the past, the activists, and we think about the 1960s, which you reference as well, right? So I listened to your podcast with PJ as well as your book launch, and you reference Cold Store, and you reference other things as well. But activists at that point in time were working class, Chinese educated, right? So more of people of the people, right? So do you think that is a weakness of activism today, and do you think it affects how activists are viewed?
Well, I have to go back to the 1950s and 1960s. That's working class, Chinese educated is only part of the story, because as you well know, that a lot of the PAP members were English educated.
Right.
Yeah, the first cabinet, most of them were English educated, and they came from civil society. And all those people who were interned, like James Puducherry, Woodhull, all those people were English educated as well.
Right.
And then too, that the Women's Charter, the leaders who campaigned against polygamy were English educated. The leadership was English educated.
Right.
So there is that two histories.
Right.
That, of course, the Chinese educated, the Chinese middle school students were more active politically. They were politicized much earlier than the English educated. And they were also anti-British. And so we have two histories, which is what I learned in when I was researching for the book 10 years ago, that there are different stories,
Right.
Yeah. So, and you can't call us monolithic, even if we are English educated. By the way, it wasn't the civil society activists who went west. It was Singapore state which went west.
So that's interesting, right? Because the Singapore state tries to be Western, but at the same time not, defines itself. So it's sort of in a very
confusing,
very peculiar, confusing and peculiar position. So you're right. So do you think that maybe activists today speak? So I accept that it's not a monolith. But do you think it's a weakness on the part of activists, maybe younger ones especially, maybe not your generation and those who have been there, done that, but younger ones who maybe are very keen?
I mean, the younger ones are more English educated. They went through the English educational system. And something else, and that's got to do with everything that we do, publications, book publishing, everything is West dominated. So the information about feminism, history of nationalism, history of racism, all that comes from the West. Because Asians, and that's our fault, we have not publicized our own histories. And I have written about feminism and feminists. They may not have called themselves feminists, but there were lots of activities about promoting women's rights throughout Japan and China and India and Iran. And so we have stories of those women. But we know about the Western stories, and that is not the women's fault, not the feminist's fault. Which is not,
So, but that would be a weakness, I suppose, or something that can be improved on.
Oh yes, certainly. I mean that's not only in relation to feminism or women's history.
Absolutely.
It's in relation to all the history,
absolutely.
Social, cultural, civilizational, India, Pakistan, Indonesia, China, Japan. We don't know much about.
Right.
And that is not our fault, the individual's fault,
Right. Okay. So on in a similar vein, right? So one of the things that I find also sometimes, because people who are in the activist scene, they are very passionate. For sure, there's a selection bias, right? And they also tend to be very familiar with the Western literature, the American ones especially, what's going on in the West, and sometimes you see some condescension on the part of some activists, right? And then they'll say, oh, you should go educate yourself more, you know. So, do you think these things, or oh, I don't need to go through the emotional labor of explaining this to you. You should understand this by yourself. Do you think when we do that, right, no matter how well intentioned,
Do you know of any instances when this happened?
Oh yeah, I see it a lot. I see it a lot
You
online.
do?
I've seen this
All
a
right.
lot online, and even when I was involved, in the race debate, right, the Chinese privilege and so on. I saw people on my side, so people who actually agreed with me. Some of them were saying such things, right? Like say, oh, I don't need to go through the labor of explaining the minority experience to you, the Chinese person. And then I was
Yeah.
thinking, but if we don't explain it, how would they ever
What
know?
they know, yes.
Yeah,
That's right.
so it was a bit strange to me. So do you think this is not a common phenomenon, or you think this is isolated, or?
Well, that happened certainly during the debate and discussions on race. It happened, and feminism is an ongoing problem because a lot of people, individuals in patriarchy especially, have difficulty understanding. They have difficulty understanding patriarchy as an ideology that's not an attack on the individual, but it's
Yeah.
a culture, and we're all trapped in some kind of culture or something that we are not consciously aware of, but we have to make ourselves consciously aware of, which is what feminists do, to understand their situation. We have a failure in our civic education. There is hardly any civic education in the schools. So we don't really understand any of our institutions, There isn't that education in schools, civic education, for people to understand. I mean, 10 years ago, people were asking me, what is civil society? I mean, that is very basic, and kids should be taught what the state is, what the government is, what the parliamentary system is, what the legal system is, what civil society is. But we have failed our young people that way. Our education system has failed our young people. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I think you are right. So there's this lack of, even sometimes on basic things, right? When I was talking to some people about the COP, the proceedings, and some people were confusing that with a judicial process, for instance, right? And I think it's just because they don't know like basic stuff, like you said, like how the parliament works.
Well, I'm not surprised they confused it with the judicial process.
Okay. Okay, I see what you did there. Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah, but even that aside, right? I mean, you see that there's what you said is absolutely true. Sometimes some basic things, right? And do you think that's on purpose, or that's accidental?
Whatever the state does is, I hope they are doing things on purpose, whether it's for good or for misleading. So yes, I'm afraid so. Even I think the state should understand that it's not doing them any favors either, that civic education is very important. And even what we call national educations, even the students know that it's propaganda. The students will tell you that. The students will tell you that it's propaganda. So we are all become very cynical. The state is cynical, and the students are cynical. We are all cynical about what is being told to us and what is being taught in terms of civic education in schools.
Right. So I accept that. I think there is that level of cynicism. Then, but why does the PAP does so well in the elections, right? So surely it's more than just the
I
cynicism,
haven't
right?
mentioned the PAP in all the time I've been talking to you.
Oh,
You.
oh, you know. So one of the things that I really like about your book launch was you say, you know, we need to expand our idea of the political, like Singaporeans always think of politics and I
Yeah.
really that really
Party
resonated with me. So
politics. Party
yeah, exactly.
politics. Yeah,
People think
yeah,
about it, so they don't want to say, "Oh, this is non-political." What are you talking
yeah.
about? Everything is,
Everything is
it is,
political.
yeah, everything is political. So, and this show is unashamedly, unabashedly political as well.
Political.
So yeah, so why does the PAP succeed? So surely it's more because I saw this exchange you had with PJ Tam, and I think you guys disagreed on this, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I remember till 1987, I was a great supporter of the PAP.
Right.
1987 was when the
Wow.
Marxist conspiracy
Oh, so that's when you turned.
turned because they were my friends.
Right.
And for the
From
first
from the
time,
church. They were from the
well,
church.
yeah,
Oh,
also colleagues, and they were helping me at
right.
Aware and all that, and I knew that there was something misleading happening, that we were not being told the truth. And I started questioning everything. Before that, Coastal happened. Oh, well, maybe they're all communists, So
Yeah,
then you
Coastal
start
was more
questioning. Yeah.
justifiable, I suppose, right? Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, yes. Yeah. Well, yeah, you can believe those, the communists were taking over the whole of Asia, remember? And yeah, the domino theory
Right, the domino. Yeah.
was quite worrying then.
Yeah.
And but Marxism had lost its
Right.
strength, lost the interest, and then suddenly you come up with Marxist conspiracy, for heaven's sake. And also, anyway, I knew them as individuals.
Right.
So that's when,
right.
that.
So
And then, of course, the eugenics theory, graduate mother scheme, all that, which the challenge came from Aware, and Aware was founded then, with those policies.
right. Yeah, the graduate mother scheme seemed to be such an important moment, right, in Singapore's history, right? Because even many within the ruling party expressed their disdain at the policy, and within a couple of years, it was sort of, even though the belief didn't really go away, I think, in many quarters. I think even you talk to many people now. Yeah, I mean, even ordinary citizens, you see some semblance of this, right? And you see that they do believe in this. Yeah. So, but the policy itself, I mean, it was rescinded or overturned a couple of years into it, right? Because of public pressure, and also the PAP actually suffered a dip in the vote share in that election in 1984. So, I mean, elections are still meaningful, right, in Singapore?
Oh yes, they are. I
Yeah.
mean, one of the purposes of the book was to show that civil society is important. That
Right.
that the work which is done by civil society has an impact on
Right.
changing attitudes,
Right.
even challenging policies. I mean, 2011 election is a very good example.
Right.
And I show in my book the changes that have happened over the last 30 years since Aware started, in relation to policies that affect women. And the Women's Charter was completely the work of women campaigning,
Right.
and the banning of polygamy.
Right.
So that was the women civil society activism. So I want people to read the book and see that it is important for citizens to act, citizens to be part of the discussion and the debate about policies.
Yeah. So one of the differences, I think, between your view of politics and PJ Tam's view of politics based on the conversation you had. I think yours gives me more hope. It gives me more hope that, if you do things, ultimately politicians do go for the votes, and if elections are meaningful, they have to listen to public pressure, right? And we have actually seen that. We have seen that this is not a government that doesn't listen completely, because all governments have to listen.
They
some
have
extent,
to listen,
right?
yes, of
they have
course.
to, yeah. So I just had a comment from my friend Sarah. She DM'd me, and she said she prays that she'll still be as passionate and sharp as you are. And that was something I wanted to. I know I didn't put this in the question
But she
as well.
is still young. Sarah is still young.
She is.
Yes,
Yeah, she
and
is.
she's got lots. She's
but
got a long way to go.
but it's very hard not to be disillusioned at times, right? Like when things happen, like when the book launch was cancelled, or even I felt a bit down.
Yeah. No.
So how do you keep that going then until?
There are lots of times you wonder if anything has changed. So writing that book was important because you can trace the history, and you can trace the changes that have happened, and so that is important. Although while you're in the middle of doing stuff, you wonder whether it's worthwhile, because there's so many things against you, working against you. And so you do get disillusioned, you get burnout, you take time off, and then go back and do the same thing, and it goes on, So
So I think that was such an important point, because if you look at it moment by moment, you may not see change, right? It's only when you look over like 10 feet, oh my God, 10 years, so much has changed. So I think it's important to take that long-term view, right? To prevent yourself from being disillusioned, right? So thank you so much. So many gems here, right? So okay. So one final one on civil society. By the way, anyone, if you have questions, then please feel free to type them. So you see a lot of people thanking you, Constance, and and I've had some DMs as well. Like they say you are sharper than many people I've had on before, which is
feminism does that to you. Feminism.
And I guess wisdom also, right? I guess wisdom, like over many years of
one of the things in my activism has done, and my membership and activism in Aware has done, is that you have to keep growing, intellectually growing, and intellectually challenging yourself. You can't be an activist and not be better informed. So that's one of the responsibilities of activism, is to be better informed, and I suppose that's why I am the way I am. Anytime people tell me, how do you keep yourself, I'd say, go and join Aware.
So that was going to be my question, but basically I like that point as well, right? So activists cannot be intellectually lazy, right? If you really want to do the work, then you cannot.
You have to can't be lazy.
Okay, so that was what I wanted to ask. So can activists be independent? Or we know that in Singapore you cannot really be completely independent, but can you ever be somewhat independent, like Aware was in the 80s? Because PJ asked this question as well, and I think I have observed this as well. I don't know whether this is fair. I wanted to ask you that a lot of civil society organizations may start off as confrontational or in opposition to the government, but over time the relationship gets chummier, and even Aware perhaps today is working hand in glove more than maybe the Aware today is not the same as the
Aware.
I
can't speak.
I know you cannot
speak for
Aware.
I
know you cannot speak for Aware, but just as an observer, so maybe not Aware specifically, but as an observer, do you think there is actually space for that kind of activism that we saw, that how you started in the 80s and how Aware started?
The thing is, whenever a new organization starts its work, it's new. it's a new idea and everybody is interested. And of course, feminism and women's issues those days. But also, you have to remember when AWARE was founded, for over 15 years, civil society was silenced. With the cold store, and the government had decided that they want to do all the work for society, that you don't need civil society to tell them what to do,
Right.
and they only wanted welfare organizations to do the work, that needs to
Right.
be done. Yeah. And so for over 15 years, for over 14 years, we didn't have any women in parliament either. And civil society was silent. So when AWARE came into the scene, it was the first one that was challenging public policies.
Right.
So it was seen as being edgy, yeah. But AWARE has worked for about 35 years. And for 35 years, we worked very hard. If we haven't done anything, achieved anything for women, then we might as well close shop. Right? So in order to achieve something, you need to do, you have different, you have to address different audiences. The public to change attitude. So when you change attitude of the public, that's what persuades the government to change. And so it was. It took us 15
Right.
years.
So the mechanism is convincing the public, not convincing the right. So it's not convincing the government directly. So
no.
Okay.
The people's attitude had to change towards domestic violence.
Right.
Before so.
Then the government will react.
We are now seeing the result of all that work.
Right.
Some of the result, and so can you work independently of the state? Look, Singapore state owns 90% of our properties and land. And where is the independent space that civil society can have access to? I just discovered with the launch of my book. So that's a huge problem. Lack of independent space is huge. And I don't think it does the government any good to monitor and manage and control everything, because you really need creative individuals to make the Singapore that we know could be done,
Right.
And so there are instances when civil society communities work together independent of the state, because to build community and to get to know each other, to understand policies, to understand better, they do work together, and they don't need the state to intervene there, or they don't need the state. We are trying to learn ourselves. But most of the time, when you need to change or address public policies, then you have to work with the state. It's the state which refuses very often to work with civil society.
Do you think that's changing? Because I see that there's been some overtures from state leaders to AWARE, for instance, right?
But AWARE
in the past few years, at least.
AWARE earned that. AWARE earned
Right.
that. Yeah.
Right.
But there are lots of other
that had
areas
to be earned, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And,
not every organization is AWARE.
no, but there are other organizations which are doing pretty good work, like
right.
The foreign labor is one issue that needs constant attention, and we
which
saw
you
how
reference in the book as well.
Yeah, and so they're doing very good work, but I don't think the ministries actually listen to them. If they have listened to them, in fact, the huge problem that everybody had to confront, including the government, when the pandemic started,
Yeah.
how it affected foreign workers. And yeah, people on the ground, the government should know that people on the ground know what is happening on the ground,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, because they are in touch with people, human beings, and the lives of human beings,
Right.
we're not, yeah, it's nothing to do
Yeah.
with somebody sitting in the office and writing policies.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. No, I agree with you. The PAP would say, oh, we have our MPs like go on the ground a lot, like and the government, and it's true, they do go on the ground a lot.
they
But I
do,
guess
they work
where the
very
blind
hard,
spot
yes.
is, right? Yeah, they do. The blind spot is, I guess, Singaporeans are very polite, right? When they see our MPs, right, they will not really like confront and question. But the moment the door
Yeah.
is closed, right, and I've witnessed this personally as well. Like people, they are criticizing the MP. The MP comes, they're so polite. The MP leaves, then they are back to criticizing. So the MP leaves saying, that's a positive person. That's one vote that I'm getting. So yeah, so I do agree. I think sometimes you just wonder like is this policy, I mean, it seems like really out of touch, and where
Yeah.
yeah
When we talk about government and civil society, the interaction, there's always tension. That's world over, you know. But in other democracies, after 4 years, you can throw them out and you'll get a new, new lot coming, which might be more supportive of your work. But we've
right.
had 50 odd years of the same government, you see. And so it's become more difficult. And yeah, no, if I say anything more, I
Right.
might say something.
You might get me cancelled. Well, yeah, no, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your thoughts on civil society. You are the guru, right, on civil society. I don't think anyone else
Well,
can give the insights. And I
we
mean, it says
yeah.
here, the
I
mother
mean,
of civil society. Yeah. So yeah, so
yeah.
let's move on to something maybe that we have maybe there's some disagreement, I don't know. So the idea of race, right? Because you're very critical in your book, even in your life, in your in your book launch and in your podcast with PJ, you're very critical of the government's approach to race, and ultimately you say race is a social construct. So basically we should be deconstructing this, right? So and you are in favor of removing the CMIO, right? So and I definitely see your point of view, but nobody ever needed to see my IC, right, to think that I'm Indian and to make fun of my dark skin, my curly hair all over my body, right? Nobody needed to look at my IC, right, to make fun of me for all of that, right? And also I found out you are also from, our ancestors came from the same place. My mom's side is also Malayali. So
Okay.
would it really be different if we didn't have the CMIO model? Wouldn't people still be able, I mean, in India there's no CMIO model, right? But even I
Indonesia,
mean the
no,
different ethnic groups, like,
Indonesia or
right,
Thailand, we are the only
right, but
country, I
that,
think.
yeah, right, but there's still racism and there's still
Oh,
racial
there
differentiation
is.
even
Yes,
without that,
there
right?
is.
So would
There is. There
removing the
is.
CMIO model, yeah,
It divides people, I think, by institutionalizing. Yes, one of the things that strikes me, I mean, when I go to Australia, because most of my family now live in Australia, and the children growing up there, they don't think of that. They're very proud of the fact that they're half this and half that, and they're proud of the culture and their heritage, but they call themselves Australian,
mm,
you know, and we still can't call ourselves Singaporean. We are either Singaporean Indian, Singaporean Chinese, Singaporean Malay. You know, and how do we then create a Singapore identity when the racial differences are institutionalized? And it's not just having it in your IC, you know. When it affects HDB, housing,
GRC,
GRC, and housing affects the minorities more than the majority, because they can only sell to another minority, and because of that they earn much less from their properties. You know, those kind of little things that people are racist, but the government should not reinforce that by reinforcing that race divisions, you know. And I think it's irresponsible, to tell you the truth. It's irresponsible to do that. We're all citizens of the same country. You have nothing to say?
Right. Yeah. So no. I'm just no. I agree with you. As in, I agree with you that there's a difference between the government institutionalizing it and society doing it, right. What the government would say is, what if there is racism and institutional safeguards are not there, right? Like the GRC is an institutional safeguard to ensure Malays and Indians are represented. And if Singaporeans are racist, but the government is not, then that's why we need the GRC, right? To guarantee that. So it's an institutional safeguard
that
against
again, if
racism.
you have looked through the history of election and people who are elected, you'll see that race doesn't matter. You know, if you look at even in the last election, Murali won against a Chinese man in a Chinese constituency. And JB Jeyaretnam, all those years ago, won
Twice,
in a Chinese constituency. Marshall was our first premier, and he was the minority of minorities. So really, who is thinking of all these issues?
Right.
The institutionalized institutions, you know, reinforces these ideas. I mean, look around us in other countries. You know, minorities are getting into power. Minorities are getting into positions of influence. Nobody says because you're Malay or Indian, you can't be prime minister. You know, that only happens in Singapore.
Definitely. I mean, that statement definitely was problematic, right? And even if it was true, if it was a generic Indian versus a generic Chinese, maybe a generic Chinese would win, right? But this is SM Taman, right? He would beat he would beat anybody. So definitely. I mean, we are on the same page there for sure. I do see your point of view, but I guess the government would say that this is to correct for human failure. And you are right, you know, so even in Aljunied there were 3 minorities that were were elected, right? So definitely, I mean, that's something that I've been thinking about as well, the GRCs. And my answer was to, at the moment at least, just reduce it to 2 people. You don't need more than 2 persons if you really want the GRC. Just have 2% GRCs and the rest could be.
But it's also sometimes it's quite comical. I don't want to name names, but then
no, it's okay. Name them. Name names.
GRCs, okay, as long as you're brown skinned, you represent the Indian, even though
you're right.
don't have any association with Indians.
no Indian
any
language.
association with Indian culture, nothing.
Yeah, yeah.
It's laughable.
Yeah. That's true. Doesn't speak any Indian languages, no grassroots experience in the Indian
No.
community. Suddenly. Yeah. So
Yeah.
definitely that's and also the Indian
Now you
community,
know
I
why
guess.
we are cynical about this whole thing.
No, I guess the Indian community is the most I would say among the three the most peculiar, because nobody in India identifies their race as Indian, right? So
Yeah.
because they are divided along north-south lines, along state lines, right?
Yeah.
Linguistically especially, and there is increasingly a fracture, right, within the Indian Singaporean Indian identity, which is generally Tamil Hindu, right?
No,
Yeah,
I
but
mean,
yeah.
the politicians were smart. They left the Indians alone because the Indians will fight among themselves, you know. You have the Malayalis, you have the
Yeah,
Tamils,
only
you have the
Indians can say this, by
Punjabis,
the
the
way.
Bengalis.
No, it's true. Like even for me, I'm Indian Muslim, right? So my
Yeah,
identity is really very, very confused,
yeah,
very mixed, right?
yeah.
Because it's not
Yeah.
the traditional Indian in the Singapore Singapore
Precisely,
context.
yes.
Yeah.
I just wrote an essay for an Aware book, which is writing a book about growing up Indian. Precisely, there is no one Indian definition of
Yeah.
being Indian, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That was a fun discussion. And so one of the things that people have this image of feminists, especially modern day feminists, right? People have this image of always unfair image in many ways, right? Always want to cancel people and very wants to take the humor out of. But you see, you are an extremely humorous person. Even in your stories, they are humorous. Even you mentioned about how you really thought Lee Kuan Yew was a very good-looking young man. You did mention that.
Yes.
Which he was, right? Which he was, and he had the height, he
He
had the
is very
charisma, and
charismatic. Yes, yes.
very extremely charismatic. Yeah. Okay, so there are a couple of questions here, right? So I think we can take them together. So what is the greatest challenge that Singaporean civil society will face? This is from Arun, and I saw one from Fadila. How does what does meaningful engagement between civil society and government look like to you?
I think one is the introduction of truly honest civic education in schools. So
Okay.
children grow up understanding the state's role, civil society's role, etc., etc. So that education is very important. 2, there must be independent spaces. 3, NAC have to decide. I know governments all over the world will say you are biting the hand that feeds you. Sure. But NACs, what is their objective in being there? Isn't it to promote creativity, promote arts in Singapore, arts activity in Singapore? How do you do that? And also this we do need independent spaces. I don't know how we can't afford it. Singapore is so expensive. So civil society itself cannot afford it.
Right.
The government controls or manages all resources, So it's very difficult for civil society. But one of the things I have noticed, and I do write in my updated version, is that in spite of it, we are having educated young people who are interested in issues. They come to me and ask me, what do we do?
Right.
And that's also how do we become active? How do we form organizations, And again, it's a lack of civic education in schools that you have young people coming up and not knowing. And this is happening in spite of POFPA and FICA and all that, okay? Because you can still, the thing about being an activist now is the uncertainty and knowing that it all depends on one person at the top somewhere in the cabinet who can make a decision about you, the
Right.
individual, or what you're saying, what you're
Right.
doing.
Right.
And so that's a huge problem, and I don't know how we can resolve that.
Right,
I
right.
really
And
don't know. Yeah.
in some cases, you don't even need a cabinet member, right? So a lot of times you
Yeah,
always have
civil
this
servant.
overzealous,
Yeah.
overzealous civil
Well,
servants or
this
administrators.
is what I suspect happened in the Arts
Right.
House. Because in
Exactly.
real life,
I don't
yeah,
think that the cabinet would be
no,
yeah,
they're not.
I don't think they would be that daft to do that. I mean, they are much smarter than that. I really genuinely mean that. So I really think that it was a silly decision by some administrator eager to please, right? But then
That's right.
how you started this conversation, because you said there's the political culture, then you rightly or wrongly anticipate what's gonna be the thing that is gonna appease the people, right? So how do you change that political culture then? That seems like a big problem. It's not like how
That
do
is
we
a
do that?
huge problem.
But at least give me some hope. Do you see it changing in the past? Do you see it having changed in the past 30 years at least? It used to be worse, right? I'm
Yes.
sure.
Yeah, but young people are saying it's quite bad now. That's true too. But it was very bad then, because it was also just after, the Marxist conspiracy, what is it called? Spectrum, isn't it?
Spectrum, Operation Spectrum.
Yeah, Operation Spectrum did limit and subdue activism. People were scared. People lived in fear. And I tell you a story. Do you have time to listen to a story?
No, I have a lot of time to listen to your stories too.
Okay. 5 years ago, I had set up a committee to award, which was called the National Singapore Advocacy Award. And this was the final meeting. And we all meet in my house. We don't have independent spaces, right? So people's homes become meeting places. So we meet here. That was the final meeting. And it was in October, so I was about to turn 80. And it was full house. Everybody turned up for the meeting. And towards the end of the meeting, there was a loud bang on the door.
Oh.
Really loud bang on the door. I sat paralyzed and petrified. And they all looked at me and said, "Constance, go and open the door, go and open the door." I said, "I'm not going to open the door." But they all knew. I was the only one who didn't know that there was a group, about 15 of them were outside surprising me with a birthday party.
Oh.
And I was petrified.
Right.
After 30 years, that
Right.
fear is there somewhere in your subconscious. And they said, look at you were petrified. My face, I couldn't move.
Right.
So you can't dismiss that kind of culture. And yet I was not directly involved. People around me were being arrested. Colleagues were being arrested. We all knew something was happening. We lived in fear for 2 weeks because we didn't know what was happening. And that fear, doesn't go away.
Wow.
The knock on the door is what we all talked about then. That 2 o'clock in the morning, the police come and knock on your door and get you up. And
now I don't know whether I can sleep tonight after this story.
We talk about it and we laugh about it. But the fact is that it was instinctive.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's conditioned.
Yeah.
That was
it's
how you.
It's a condition.
Yeah. You started the book launch by saying that even you were not too affected by the initial cancellation, right? You said you had sort of normalized it in your mind already, right?
Yeah.
And that's Yeah, that's really scary,
That's
right? Like
sad.
when
That's
we
scary.
that's sad. That's sad more than scary, but it's scary also, right? When we normalize such thing, like
Yeah.
this is it's supposed to happen. Yeah, yeah. Humor is our coping mechanism, right? Yeah. So I'll just take one more. It's almost 1 hour already. Thank you so much. I'll just take one or two questions. So okay, so this one, let's end off on this because most of the viewers are younger folks. So what advice do you have for Singaporean youths who want to advocate for change?
I'm often asked by young people that question, what can we do? And I always say, I mean, everything that we have done, all the organizations that I've been involved in, starts with a conversation around a table. Sometimes that conversation is triggered by something that has happened, maid abuse, for instance, or public policy. But you always start with a conversation, and the conversation lead you to crystallize ideas and better get informed. And there's nothing wrong. You're not breaking any law by having conversations around a table, but you're empowering yourself to be better informed and better educated as a citizen. And a citizen, you can't sit and complain about what's happening around you. You have to do something about it. Write a letter to the MP, for instance, when you find something that you're unhappy about. So, and once you start that way, you will build up into a coherent community of activists who want the same thing, who hold the same. One of the nicest things about being a civil society activist, being a member of a civil society organization, and I wasn't just involved with the WARE, I was involved with the wider community of civil society activists, is that you suspend race. There's no ageism, there's no racism, there's no classism. You're just the individual focusing on a value or a passion.
Right.
You have a cause. You don't focus on anything else. That cause is what drives you. And I think that's very empowering. And that's where I truly felt like a Singaporean, that I am a Singaporean. I belong.
Right. So do activists need that community to feel that sense of empowerment?
Yes.
So you cannot do this alone, right?
You cannot do. There are activities like writing to the MP you can do by yourself. But if you want to achieve something greater than that, would be a good idea to have a community. But community is essential. I mean, I tell young people who come and ask me, raise these questions, I said, you need to nurture a community because we have lots of single people, going to grow old. Alone. So you have to start now nurturing a community, who will be your friends and your supporters through life's journey to when you're 86 or 90 or 91, whatever age,
Right.
But you need that. Without that support, without that community, you're alone in this world. And I couldn't be who I am or what I am without that support of friends.
Thank you so much. That is really humbling and inspiring at the same time. So there's actually a question by a young activist, Noor from Lepak Conversation. So sorry, I said that was the last one, but I felt I had to ask her question. How do activist groups toe that line of speaking up against policies that are not fair, but at the same time maintain a good enough relationship with the government? So because sometimes there's also a tendency to just bang your head against the wall and then you're not going to get hurt, right? So how do you
of
balance?
Of course, there is that different points of view, even among activists, that there are young activists who feel that you have to be loud and you have to shout. I mean, when we started, people were saying we were shouting, And 32 years, what we said seemed like, because we had come out of the blue and there had not been any civil society activism, suddenly there is this group of women. Who are they, And
Right.
why are they so rude? Why are they so rude? Why are they so loud? You don't have to be.
So nothing's changed essentially, right? So that's people still say that, right? So
People still say that, but really, I mean, there are things you can do. You can change if you're persistent enough, you can change. Some areas are easier than other areas, especially since we are such a capitalist society, and labor is often mistreated and abused. Those are issues which are hard to confront, because our state, our government looks at the bottom dollar. Everything has to have profit. Everything is profit driven. We have lost our sense of humanity, and which is what civil society, the work of civil society is. To remind people that we're all human. The worker who is cleaning your street is as human as you are, and we had to remind ourselves of that. And they have a family to feed, just as you have a family to feed, and they're here to work. And work and labor is very essential for human dignity. So, yeah, I have lost track of your question.
No, it's okay. No, I think that is really a nice way to end things off. So on that socialist note, right? I think it's so rare. I think especially nowadays, because I think the nature of social media, it doesn't encourage this kind of thing, right? So even when people that we disagree with, often we may not realize, but we think of them as lesser, or we dehumanize them. But I think to recognize the humanity in everyone, right? And then that's a good starting point for conversations, right? And I love the fact that you say don't belittle the idea of conversations, right? Every change starts from conversations, because people always ask, I don't want to talk about it. What can I do, right? I want to do and change now. But
that's a Singapore thing, you see. We have
very
to do things.
Very Singapore. But to do something, it takes 20 years of conversation or something. Right? But they don't want to do the conversation part.
No.
So thank you so much.
Thank you, Walid, for having me.
No, I feel weird even calling you by name, right? Because you're such a legend.
Why?
And I think I think history will judge you really well. History will really judge you really well. And I pray for a very long life for you, and that you can continue using your voice.
I'm not quite sure about that.
No, really. I hope you continue to be healthy and to be as sharp as you are, because there's a lot of wisdom that I think the rest of us have not fully extracted from you. And everyone, please get this.
I think a lot of the times is because we haven't got time to think and be reflective. Right. We need to give ourselves that time, and which is why conversations are important. Getting together as a group and having conversation make us more reflective.
Right. Thank you so much. Even Professor Yaakob Ibrahim
I was looking forward.
Thank you.
I was looking forward to meeting you and having this conversation with you. Thank you for inviting me.
The pleasure was all mine. Please get this book, everyone. Okay, good night, everyone.
Yes,
Bye-bye.
Yes.